dating at the time, and he has my stepdaughter who just graduated from Tuskegee University in May. She was with her mom, and her mom was not doing the right things, and she loved Tony. I couldn't understand because she was just like 3, 4, and I'm like, how do you know you love him so much? You know, she loved Tony so much, and she just never wanted to go home. She just wanted to be with him, and so one day he was taking her home, and there was some craziness going on with the mother and her boyfriend, and he was like, I'm not leaving her there. And so he went to the police station and said, you know, this is our custody or whatever, but I'm not leaving her there, and the police agreed. He brought her home. And then I thought about Alan Temple, because he said, well, you know, he wanted full custody. And I said, well, there's this church, and there's a lot of connected people. I said, maybe we could, you know, I heard a lot of things about how, you know, they're uppity and this and that and the other. But maybe we could visit or not visit, maybe we can call them. And I hear they help the community and everything. So we did, and I got Reverend Donald Miller on the phone. But he just prayed with us. He didn't really offer any help or any connections or anything. And he just prayed. And so then I'm like, okay, we got to go get an attorney now. And so, so we went and we found this attorney. But she told Tony, she goes, it's really hard for a man to get full custody of a daughter in California, so you can hang it up. But we kept her because she was a threat. She looked threatening, but she wasn't good. I mean, we did all the work. And so when he got full custody, it's legal, and the other one, he got all of that full. And we wanted to thank Reverend Miller, so we went to Allen Temple, and when we got there, we were looking all over for him, and finally someone spotted him. And then when we were leaving that day, there were Deacon Rhodes, Frank Rhodes, and Deacon Carville. Yeah, they were out in the lot, and they knew we hadn't, you know, we were visitors, and they were just so warm and friendly, and I'm like, okay, these people are okay. They're nice, you know? And they were from, South Carolina or North Carolina, and Tony's from North Carolina, and they struck up a conversation, and we just, after that, it was history, and we kept going back. Now, to get kids to go back, they don't have those same circumstances, or to go, because there are, that's a big question, and I'd love to talk about that question. Yeah.
I think, though, the image of Allen Temple has changed somewhat than what it was in the past, because that's what I used to hear often. But now, I think because it's talked about so much and they've done so much, I think people know that they are very inclusive of everybody. So I think the image of Allen Temple has changed and lowered, not lowered negatively, but lowered so that people feel it's okay to go to Allen Temple. I feel like it's okay to go there. So I don't think the image is like it was when you were going there.
Yeah.
Even though
maybe not exactly, but I think there's still, in order to get the kids in there, there's still some. There's one guy who brings kids from the juvenile hall all the time, and I'm like, how do you do that? Yeah, but it's like, how do we keep them there? You know, we have to keep them there. So yeah. So I have some ideas about that. They might not be popular either. So.
I have a question on the book.
Okay.
So the motivation to write it was clear. Do you see it being used as a education tool?
Yeah, I would love for it to be. And yesterday, Tony and I went to Nellie's in, in West Oakland, and the lady, she knows you too, on the school board. I can't remember her name, but with the blonde, the short blonde hair, the lady on the Oakland school board.
Oh, yeah, okay.
She was in there, and I invited her here. That's how I know she knew you, but it was last minute. I'll just say, that's okay. That's okay. All right.
We are appropriate.
She's bringing out the rear.
We gotta run, we got another case.
Oh, okay,
Can I
that's
ask just one question?
Sure.
Why is it that your mother never wanted to talk about her famous grandfather? I mean, her
And that's
father.
a
Yeah.
big one too, and that's
Yeah.
in the book too, and I
Is
can
it?
only,
Okay, all
and
right.
I'm gonna finish answering your question too, but I can only speculate that it had to do with my father, some dysfunctional things that were going on there. But also, it was during a time when the Black Panthers were big, when, you know, there was more militant, when we got, by the time I was born. And people were calling him an Uncle Tom more. And I think there could have been some shame there as well, like a combination of things.
Okay.
But also, I was telling someone that over 20 years ago, I heard Farrakhan saying if we would have, if more of us would have listened to Booker T. Washington, we would be a lot further away, you know, further ahead than we are today.
Well, we thank God for Alan Temple, but Beth Eden's the one you should have been.
Okay. All right, thank you guys for coming. Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
You're gonna finish Don's question, and I think there's another question.
All right. So anyway, with her was the new deputy chief superintendent for Oakland, and he's here from Chicago or Denver. By way of Chicago. Yeah. So that's anyway, they told me, I gave them 4 books yesterday, and they told me that they're gonna do something, because I could definitely see it in high schools and colleges. Yeah.
I'd like to add that Sarah did a book signing at Allen Temple a week ago too, and Carol Ward Allen was there, and she's interested in buying a class set so that she can read with her students and have discussions around it. There was a question over here somewhere, I thought.
No?
Well, I will ask
Oh,
one.
okay.
Sarah, is there any possibility, and I wasn't at church a couple weeks ago, I was out of town. Is there a possibility that it could be introduced into the Sunday school? As, you know, a supplemental tool or informational, you know, some sort of way.
Right.
Well,
that our
periodically,
young-
they do adopt, select book for the members of certain Sunday school classes to read.
And I just said I'd be open. to
Yeah,
that.
I'm specifically talking about the kids.
Yeah, I'd be open to.
I don't know. That'd have to be brought up with the superintendent or the pastor, I'm sure.
And Ishmael, did you have?
Well, I think it's ironic that Booker T. Washington was called a Uncle Tom when he was really a militant, and risked his life every day in a southern climate of hostility when Southerners were preaching extermination, some of the newspapers in Memphis and other places, and we're on a rampage of terrorism. Of course, we don't call Americans terrorists. But
They do in Europe.
but during Reconstruction, when there was a whiff of freedom among African Americans, there were massacres all over the place. When blacks tried to vote, for example, in New Orleans, there was a massacre that came down as the shame of New Orleans. And when Andrew Johnson, who usually had the Southern strategy first, let the Confederacy back in, they went on a rampage and we're back in the Senate like they are now. The Confederates have won because now they control Congress. So that was the atmosphere under which Booker T. Washington had to work. And as I did research on this, I saw the photos of the students building their own buildings. Of course, that was philanthropy. He got knocked for that. But that was a self-help institution. And if they'd only graduated the Commodores and the Tuskegee Flying Aces, that'd have been enough. But Tuskegee has graduated thousands of professionals.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I will not criticize Booker T. Washington, because when I was a child in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and my mother left Chattanooga to seek employment in the north, in Buffalo, I was left with my uncle. And my uncle was the only black person in the neighborhood who went to work every day dressed up in a suit. I remember watching him he was my role model. And he would walk to work, and he was not cut out for the kind of work that, say, my grandfather and others had to do. That's because my cousin, Ishmael, we got 4 Ishmaels.
We don't know what wrong.
I think it might have been Muslim slaves, Ishmael. But he learned tailoring at Tuskegee, and he taught it to my uncle. And that's how my family, and a lot of other Southern families, had food on the table. Now, you look at the criticisms of Booker T. Washington. First is that he was against the voting rights of black people, when actually he was financing the voting rights on the side. Just like Elijah Muhammad said, he was against writing a book that'll be out on Muhammad Ali. I've interviewed a lot of people in the Nation of Islam. Well, Elijah Muhammad said he was against the electoral process, but he was giving people money on the side. He's financed, but that was a strategy where you had to have 2 masks. You had to be accommodating, but at the same time, you could be financing or supporting liberation. So the other knock on Booker T. Washington is that he was merely trying to train people for manual labor. And I looked at his papers at Hampton. He has a lot of jokes at the expense of Du Bois, incidentally. Calling him a dandy and all this, wear the monocle and all this. But he said that he wanted to train people for both the head and the hands.
Yeah.
And the heart.
And the heart. And you could say that he was the first black president. Because like some Native American tribes who have sovereignty, he had a government-to-government relationship. I mean, he's the one who had patronage. He'd tell you who to hire, and had a lot of power. So I think that a lot of the problems that he has and the propaganda that's come out against him, and I mentioned the one that was in the New Yorker magazine,
Right.
the lie that he was beaten up outside of a brothel, when it was more like a Stanley Brown situation where he knocked on the wrong door. I tried to tell this man in the New Yorker who mentioned my name in there that the red light district where he was supposed to be beaten up was downtown. The place where he was beaten by not only an individual but by the mob was uptown in a residence. It was not a brothel. So all this propaganda is created by, and I will put this out there, Northern intellectuals who were jealous. Okay? People don't know that Booker T. Washington got a Harvard degree in 1900. Now this is a former slave. They had to work behind some, I mean, Du Bois and all of that. But I mean, in other words, he got that kind of recognition. Du Bois is also competing with him over his patronage.
Truly.
Now he's talking about segregation. Booker T. Washington followed this policy of segregation. There was an NACP patron. Du Bois couldn't go to his house because his wife was a Southerner, right, who had those racial attitudes. So he accused Du Bois, who incidentally was a eugenicist. I'm sorry to put that out there. He did belong to the eugenics movement, and said that lower class black people should not breed. You know, Du Bois was an elitist. He said the underclass should not breed. He was with Margaret Sanger, you know. So Monroe Trotter and some of the others criticized him, made life miserable for him when he traveled north. For example, they staged a stunt and caused a debacle in a church in the north. And Booker T. Washington said, "You will never do that in a white church." Du Bois said, Booker T. Washington said, "You would never do that in a white church. So he knew who his enemies were. But later, I want to say this about Du Bois, later he came around to recognize Booker T. Washington's achievement. He was an integrationist, but he ended up in a black country where Nkrumah and those people were a little unfriendly to him because they were Garveyites, who was influenced by Booker T. Washington. So I think his legacy, I think, things go in cycles.
We don't know. Right?
Things go in cycles. And I think that we're entering a period where we'll not paint things so much in black and white terms as somebody's Uncle Tom or somebody's Nat Turner or all the great gradations in between.
And Du Bois and Booker T, a lot of people don't know, but they were friends initially, and then they broke. There was never a debate, but they broke off publicly. And I speculate, I don't know, I wasn't there, that it was Booker T. Washington is one that he gets an idea, he gets focused, he stays the path. When he got sick in New York, he said, I was born in the South, I lived and worked in the South, and I'm going to die in the South. And they took him back to Tuskegee where he died. But so when he got something in his mind, he didn't sway. When W.E.B. Du Bois said not to put him down, because I wish they would have learned some way to make it work together. But he when he got upset, he left the NAACP, he would leave because when things weren't going his way, he left the country, he left America. But Washington, he stayed.
Well, Booker T. Washington says that. He says that you come down here and you stay on that campus. He doesn't mingle with, doesn't leave the campus.
Oh.
But in connecting what you have demonstrated in terms of your journey, your self journey, the courage to believe after finding that you have always been, no matter what the trauma has gone through, most of our our heritages and what we have gone through as a people, and this dysfunction, out of the dysfunction, we've been able. This world marvels at who we are,
Right.
and then you finding who you become, and now you're sharing that as a part of the extension of your heritage. And what Ishmael was just alluding to, and what has occurred and what continues to perpetuate of the lack of the knowledge through the truth, or through lenses of our own truths, that we can tell it, as opposed to being divided by jealousy and by propaganda, and where people are really not attached to or are communicated with to really get the truth, so that they're able to dialogue with some understanding, as opposed to just raising their hand and spewing out propaganda. Oh, he wanted the slaves, and not knowing what Ishmael just shared. How deep, how basically Booker T knew how to navigate, even in the midst of the system.
They call him the Wizard of Tuskegee.
And it still evolves today, but we've got to tell it.
There was a racist outcry when he had dinner at the White House. They called it an N-word restaurant. And he could have been murdered over that. They called Martin Luther King Uncle Tom at the same period. I asked people of the Nation of Islam who were very critical of him, I said, what about you guys? I mean, you sold these wolf tickets about confrontation. I said, you're nonviolent too. Because when they killed Ronald Stokes, like in Los Angeles, people say, what you gonna do about it? Malcolm X got up and said, Allah will take care of it. That's one of the reasons that he left the nation, is because Elijah Muhammad did not want confrontation with the police or the authorities. But they talked a big wolf ticket thing. They ended up murdering each other. They murdered Malcolm, see? So here's Martin Luther King, like Booker T. Washington, in the South.
Right.
They don't know the South.
Right.
When I was a kid, they can go out and kill you and get off just like now. But even worse in those days. I remember those murders and killings. So sure.
Another question.
Okay.
So in your book, do you go back into that history and interwind it into your experience in your adult life and how it impacts you?
Excellent. It's a great book.
And can I read just the first, the beginning, because I start off with who Booker T. Washington